Hello and welcome to the podcast from the Huffines Institute Sports Medicine and Human Performance. I'm your host, Tim Lightfoot, and I'm so glad that you took the time to join us today. We have another interesting and passionate individual from the world of sports medicine and human performance, and I'm so happy and honored to have her with us today. But first, I wanted to remind you, we are in the middle of the pandemic, and as we've said on all of our other podcasts this summer, if you need guidelines for exercising during the pandemic, look at this box right down here. That's the American College of Sports Medicine's guidelines for exercising during the pandemic. We hope that you are staying active and healthy during this time. As I said, my guest today I'm very excited to have her on, and so grateful. We've had some scheduling hiccups primarily on my part, and I'm so glad that she's taken the time out of her busy schedule to join us today, and that's Dr. NiCole Keith. Welcome to the podcast, NiCole.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. And like I said, we're so excited to have you with us. I'm going to tell the audience a little bit about you, and then we'll just jump right into the conversation. Dr. Keith is a research scientist at the Indiana University Center for Aging Research at the Regenstrief Institute. She's the Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs at Indiana University School of Health and Human Sciences, as well as being a professor at Indiana University School of Health and Human Sciences. Now, she is the co-creator of the Physically Active Residential Communities and Schools program there in Indianapolis, which is a partnership with the Indianapolis Public Schools and some of the federally qualified health centers and Indiana University. She's also the National Physical Activity Plan Alliance Vice President, which is a coalition of national organizations that have come together to promote physical activity in the human and the American population. But more importantly, one of the reasons that we're talking to her today is that she is the 64th and the current president of the American College of Sports Medicine, or ACSM. She certainly has served in a number of roles there with ACSM, being a former vice president, board of trustees on many different communities. Dr. Keith graduated with her bachelor's degree from Howard University, master's degree from University of Rhode Island, PhD from University of Connecticut, and most recently got a master's degree from Indiana University in clinical research. Again, NiCole, it is so great to have you on. Thank you so much for being with us. And so we're going to start off with a question many of our listeners may know, but I want you to tag on. And that, what is American College of Sports Medicine and what does it do?
So the American College of Sports Medicine is a professional organization that has about 50,000 members and certified professionals around the world. Our mission really is to advance and integrate scientific research into both clinical and fitness practice, as well as to support sports medicine physicians. And so most of our members are either basic scientists like you, or public health professionals or physical activity practitioners, or sports medicine physicians or primary care sports medicine physicians.
So what does the president of ACSM do? People may not know that this is actually a 3-year gig. You serve as the kind of incoming president, then you're the current president, and then you're the past president. So what does your duties entail? You still have a full-time job after all, and this is a big organization.
Fortunately, I have a very, and so he understands what an honor it is to be in this position. And while I am still expected to do my job, he has released me from my teaching responsibilities so that I have more time. Not every dean does that, but my dean did. And so it really allows me the opportunity to focus on my administrative role and my research role at the university, but also then my third thing now, instead of teaching, is this big service role to ACSM. So the president-elect, president, and past president have really distinct responsibilities. The main responsibility of the president-elect is to plan the annual meeting. And so that's what I spend a lot of time doing. Last year, up until about March, and then we pivoted and did the virtual experience. And so it was a very busy time, and I'm thankful to the staff and the program committee for helping get that done. The president's main role is really to serve as the spokesperson for ACSM. And so when people want statements from the college, it comes from me. And I spend an extraordinary amount of time talking to the media and talking to other partner organizations, and doing volunteer work for other partner organizations as the representative of ACSM. The past president's responsibility is really to serve as a point of continuity for the president-elect and for the president. And while they have really particular committee assignments, and we all do, um, we're all on the executive committee together. We meet every week for at least an hour. It never goes an hour. It's usually closer to an hour and a half, discussing with the CEO the business of ACSM. And then I probably spend 2 to 3 hours a day on work related to ACSM.
uh, such as this podcast right now.
Yeah, I'm not counting that because this is kind of just, um, I guess I should count it, but just really like running the organization, and not that I run the organization, but a lot of things get bounced off of the executive committee about how the organization is doing and what needs to happen in terms of our strategic directions.
Now, you mentioned something though that a few minutes ago that kind of went by pretty quick, and I think that I want to take a few minutes because I'm not sure a lot of people appreciate an organization like ACSM. When we actually have two big meetings a year, one in the beginning of April, usually one at the end of May, and y'all had to make the tough call this year after planning for years for these meetings to actually cancel those meetings because of the COVID situation. That was a big deal to do that and then to pivot over to a virtual meeting. Can you share with the audience a little bit about behind the scenes decisions that had to be made about whether to do that or not? In hindsight, it would seems to be a no-brainer that we would do that, but these decisions were being made in early March when the depth of this wasn't known. So can you tell the folks a little bit about that kind of behind the scenes decision making?
Yeah, so as you stated, we have the Health and Fitness Summit that happens this year. It was scheduled for mid-March, and then the annual meeting that was scheduled for the end of May. And mid-March, in the Health and Fitness Summit was scheduled to be in Atlanta. And in mid-March, the first COVID-19 cases in Atlanta, there were 3 cases identified. And we had to have the discussion about whether we really wanted people to come together. That summit is great. That every day starts with multiple exercise opportunities that happen in the hotel. And there are fitness leaders from all over the world who come and lead exercise for the attendees. And did we really want, with COVID-19 in Atlanta, for our attendees to come in and exercise together and high five and hug like we do when we reunite, and knowing that this deadly virus was in Atlanta. And so we made the tough decision really the day the meeting was scheduled to start to not have it. And so it was really expensive. The Health and Fitness Summit usually has between 700 and 1,000 attendees, so it's smaller than the annual meeting. And so it's only in the hotel. It's not like in a convention center. But it was going to cost us a lot of money to cancel. Professional organizations have insurance, and so if there's force majeure, the insurance will cover it. But COVID-19 wasn't covered in the force majeure clause, and so the staff did a great job of negotiating with the hotels so that we could have some cost savings, but it ended up costing us a lot of money. And so at that point, we knew annual meeting was scheduled to be in San Francisco. If you recall, COVID-19 became the hotspot for COVID-19 was California. And by the end of March, we were seeing, or by the third week in March, we were seeing that the cases were increasing in California. And at that point, maybe the third week in March, we knew we couldn't go there. And during that same week, other members who had planned to attend were asking us, why have you not yet canceled this meeting? And we were getting basically hate mail from people saying, we can't believe you have not yet canceled this meeting, but we couldn't because we wanted San Francisco to let us out of the deal. I will say we had about $1.2 million of reasons why we were not going to cancel the meeting, because we had contracts with the host hotel, we had contracts with the convention center, and if we pulled out, we were going to be on the hook for that money. And if we didn't pull out, then they would let us out. We wouldn't be on the hook for the money. So at one point, the host hotel was being used as shelter for the homeless, and the convention center was being used as a triage unit for patients. And so at that point, we knew we weren't going to be able to go there. The hotel was like, no, we'll have it cleaned up by the time it's time for you and your members to arrive. The Moscone Center was saying, no, we won't. And so they let us off the hook and canceled with us. And so there is something in the host hotel contract that says if the Moscone Center is not available, we don't have to come. And so once the Moscone Center said no, the host hotel let us out of our contracts, and we were able to, at the end of March, make the announcement that the annual meeting wasn't going to happen.
That was a tough decision, I know, and I know you had, because I had people asking me the same thing, and I mean, I had no clue. I kept telling people, I know the people that are leading the organization. I trust them to make the right decision. Just hold on. And there was these great reasons for us to wait, because again, an organization like ACSM, while we're financially solvent, a $1.2 million hit is a $1.2 million hit.
Sorry, I said that wrong. It is $2.1 million. So it was double that. And I'm sorry.
That's even a bigger hit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, even if we could find a way to pay that and not, you know, the organization wouldn't have crumbled. We've got money in reserves, but it wouldn't have been financially responsible. And we would have had to find ways to find that money in other activities, and it just wouldn't have been responsible to our members to say, okay, well, we're going to pay that, but now we're going to be in the red for the next 10 years.
As I said, we had great officers doing what was best for the organization. There's a reason the organization's been around for 65 years or so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. It was about that time when we were supposed to have the annual meeting. I believe May 25th was the death of George Floyd, and that reignited a conversation in the country that's an appropriate conversation, as it had been needed to be had for many, many years, and that's about issues around racism, especially institutional racism. And I'd like for you to share with the folks that are watching and listening what ACSM has done. And it's not like, at least to my knowledge, ACSM has just not come to this party. We've been doing a lot of things for a long time, but I would love for you to tell folks about what ACSM is doing to address those kind of institutional inequities.
Yeah. So I like to tell the story. I've been a member of ACSM for about 25 years. And when I first started attending annual meetings, everybody was white. You mean it was just, you were there. you know that there were very few people of color who were members of ACSM and none who were leaders. And I kept coming. It's a great, you know, it's a great meeting, and I learned a lot. But it's really disheartening when you're you're a student or you're a junior faculty member, and you can't look for people who look like you in leadership positions in your professional organization. So I had been a member for about 10 years, and the annual meeting was in Indianapolis, and it was at the time when Bill Roberts and Bob Salas were about to become president and president-elect. And I was, my husband at the time, he's still my husband, but his job at the time he was the executive director of the Black Coaches and Administrators. And uh, their annual meeting was at the same time. And I think that if you've been to Indianapolis, the Black Coaches and Administrators host hotel was the Hyatt, and ACSM's host hotel was the Westin. So they're really right across the courtyard from each other. And I was going to my room at the Hyatt, and I got in the elevator, and Robert Carter, who's also a fellow of ACSM and a good friend, was in the elevator too. And he asked me, do you know these two gentlemen? And I knew that it was Bill Roberts and Bob Salas. So I introduced myself, and I said, I'm NiCole Keith. And and Bill Roberts said, Keith, we're about to have a meeting with Floyd Keith. Do you know him? And I said, oh yeah, he's my husband. And then Bill said, well, we're going to talk about how we can partner with the BCA to increase diversity within ACSM. And they invited me to come to the meeting. So I thought, for the first time in my career, I get access to ACSM leadership, and it's because of my husband. It's not because of my credentials or anything, but that's okay. I'll take it. And so, um, so we went to the meeting. I did not think that the BCA is coaches. It's football coaches and basketball coaches mostly, but that's just not who ACSM is trying to recruit. And so I thought that's not what we want to do here. And we had a great conversation about ways to increase organizational diversity. And Bill liked what I had to say, and he asked me to sit with him at the banquet that afternoon, or the next evening. And then the next year, ACSM was in Denver, and Bill invited me to a lot of things. He invited me to go to different committee meetings with him. He invited me to go to receptions that were invitation only. And it occurred to me at that time, this is how you do it. This is how you increase organizational diversity. So I my office happens to be a 7-minute walk from the National Center. So after the Denver meeting, I was invited back to the National Center to brainstorm about how we could implement some of my ideas. But then at that point, I thought these ideas are not the right ideas. What we need to do is create opportunities for underrepresented minorities to do with fellows exactly what I got to do with Bill, and that is be matched with a fellow who's influential, who can take an underrepresented minority member around and learn about the ins and outs of ACSM and expand their professional network. So we created the Leadership and Diversity Training Program. It's 13 years old, and it is exactly what I described. It's application-based, but people who are selected, and it's highly competitive, but people who are selected get the opportunity, fully funded, to attend an annual meeting and be matched with a fellow, and then again visit that fellow halfway through the year at their academic institution, their lab, or their clinic. And it's worked really well. We've had 150 participants, many of whom have become fellows. 4 of whom are on the boards of their regional chapters. And we've had, I think, 9 who have been elected to the Board of Trustees. So that is one way that we've increased organizational diversity. But if you think about, and like I said, it's happening for 13 years, the volume of people who are coming, and now it would never happen that someone would come to an annual meeting and say, there's nobody at this meeting who looks like me, let alone anybody in leadership who looks like me. That's not the case. And so what people are thinking about is also different. And so when exercise as medicine was developed 13 years ago, the people who were at the table were also saying we're really interested in diversity. And so there's a exercise as medicine for underserved and community health and community populations. And so that's another group. We have the Diversity Action Committee, which has been in existence. Mike Sacco is actually the first chair. So long before I was a member, working on issues related to diversity within programming and membership at ACSM. We have the Strategic Health Initiative, Health Equity, which was established when Barb Ainsworth was president. It was her presidential platform. Every year we have the diversity reception where ACSM celebrates diversity, and that was implemented by Larry Kenney when he was president, and diversity was also his presidential platform. And I got those reversed because Larry was president before Barb. But then when Larry Armstrong was president, and I will share that Larry Armstrong was my dissertation advisor, and he's been about diversity for his entire career. And so he was involved intimately with the development of the Leadership and Diversity Training Program. But he actually fundraised so that the number of slots available every year went from 15 to 20 so that could be expanded. So we have a lot of work going on, and it's been going on for quite some time. You probably saw a few weeks ago that we came out with ACSM Statement on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we got some blowback from people saying, why are you just talking about this now? And we have been talking about this for literally decades. So that's just simply not the case.
It's interesting that when organizations made statements like that, and everybody thought that was the first time they'd been thinking about it, and it's like that's not the case. ACSM has been talking about it for a while, maybe not as long as they should have. But I also want to thank you for the leadership and diversity program, because I know at least one of my former postdocs and one of my former master students has taken advantage of that, and it has worked really well for them to help them connect in the organization in a bigger way. So that's, I think, a real feather in your hat as well. So it bears noting that you are the first African American female that's president of the organization. Actually, you're the first minority individual or person of color that's the president of ACSM, and that's a huge accomplishment, I think, not only for ACSM, but for you as well. Um, any thoughts about what that has been like for you? Because I'm sure you get asked that question all the time.
I don't get asked that question all the time, actually, and it's funny because I have stories about people who are really just surprised. And I tell the story, we were in Atlanta, not in Atlanta, in Orlando last year, and Bob Salas introduced me to a member, and he said, I would like you to meet, I hadn't become president-elect yet. Um, and he said, I'd like you to meet the next ACSM president-elect. And he gestured toward me, and the person who he was introducing me to said, where is he? And
No,
was,
no,
so
really?
so I reached out my hand and I said, hi, I'm NiCole Keith. It's nice to meet you. And, he turned completely red, but it's like, it can't be me because there's never been a president who looks like me. And Bob felt really bad. And I was like, it's okay, because we don't know why this person, there've been lots of women who have been presidents. So we don't know what was in this man's head. And it wasn't Bob's fault. But it was, I thought, pretty funny. And I just think that people aren't expecting me when they are about to meet the ACSM president. So, that's kind of the difficult part of it. But the fun part of it is, I don't know, have you ever been to the National Center?
Yes, many times, many times.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know that in the National Center, there's a conference room that's called the past president's room, or the president's room. And all of the pictures of every president from ACSM, so 64 presidents pictures are on the wall. And I hear from staff how refreshing it is to go into that room and see my picture hanging there. Just because there's, a Black person on the wall. Everybody else has been white. And so they feel encouraged that, the organization is changing, and that it's changing consistent with the way the world is changing. It's encouraging because I get emails frequently from students, but also from younger professionals and junior faculty, saying how encouraging it is to see that somebody who looks like me can become president. It gives them encouragement for the positive things that can happen within the organization in the future. And I've had 2 emails of people who said that they're going to join ACSM because I'm a president. So it's great to be a role model. I want to be a role model. That's why I'm a faculty member. It's why I'm a mom, because I want to be a role model and I care about the next generation of people. So it is really fun being the first Black president of ACSM.
And that's something I'm not sure we haven't talked about yet, but I was going to ask you later on. You just mentioned that you're a mom as well, on top of being president and a faculty member. How do you get it all done on a daily basis? What hints do you have? Because I've had many female doctoral students and some postdoc students as well, and that's the career issue that they have. They say, I have this career that demands all my time, but yet I want to have a family to go along with it. Is there a secret for balancing that?
There's no secret. So the first thing is that you make sure you have people around you who can support you. So if that's a spouse, that's great. If it's an extended family, that's great. It was just my husband and me, and we will tell people that we married well. that we've supported each other in our careers, that my career is as important to him as his career is, and the reverse is true too. So being very supportive of one another. When we first got married, we weren't around any family. It was just us. And so we had to support each other and take turns. The other thing is, people are like, I want to wait until it's the right time, and it's never the right time. I had my first daughter 2 weeks after I defended my thesis and 4 weeks before I started my PhD program. And,
Wow.
uh, and so my husband was coaching at the time, and so he would take her with him to work. They had morning football practice. She was at football practice with him. And then when I got out of class, I'd go back and get her from his office, and then I would keep her. And we just did this we have 4 kids, and we did this through our 4 kids. And the great thing is now all but one of our children are adults, and they see that it's not a balance. And people talk about work-life balance. I say that doesn't exist. My European colleagues say that's unhealthy, but I don't think there's a balance. There's an integration. And so it's not unusual. My youngest daughter plays collegiate basketball, and I don't miss her games. Again, I said I have a great dean, and so she plays her games on Thursday and Saturday. And so on Thursday around noon, she plays at University of Southern Illinois in Edwardsville. I drive to Edwardsville. It's about 3 hours from where we live. Um, I work, I go to the game, and then on Friday, I work from the hotel all day. And then on Saturday, I go to her next game, and then I come home. But it's not unusual for me to take a call during the game because it has to happen at that time. And I go on mute and listen, and it's happened more than once. So people who know me know um, I'm at a basketball game, so I'm going to go on mute until it's my turn to talk. And nobody thinks it's unusual because there's a way to integrate your work and your life, and especially as faculty members, that we have jobs such that we can work at any time. And so there's no reason to put your family on hold. And people will say, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to fully focus on my kids. But it doesn't mean that because I'm working, I'm not focused on my kids. I'm being a role model for my kids, that you can be a mom or a dad and still pursue a career. And they know that. So it's actually a really great thing.
Well, I think with that story, you're going to be a role model for more than just your kids, I think, because there are a lot of other young professionals out there that are struggling with that same thing. And one of the things that we really focus on this podcast is that we talk about how you got to where you are. And the question I often ask is, what was formative in your life that made you decide number one, you wanted to be a professor and you wanted to come into this field? Did you wake up when you were 5 years old and say, I'm going to be a college professor and I'm going to work in physical activity?
So yes and no. And so my mom was the dean of students for Grand Valley State College at the time. It's now Grand Valley State University. But she was the dean of students, and just like I had work-life integration, she had work-life integration. And so it was not unusual for my mom to take me to work. But even before that time, she got her PhD, and I was there. I think I might have been 7 when she got her PhD. And I remember how happy she was. I might get this wrong because she has degrees from Central Michigan and Eastern Michigan University. But I think it was Central Michigan University, and she was the first Black person to get a PhD from that university. And I remember how proud she was and how proud the president was and how he commented on it. And I was like, I'm getting a PhD. And then when I got to go to work with her, and the students were always in her office and they loved her, and she got to do all of these things that seemed like so much fun to me. And I didn't have to go to class with her. So I didn't see the other side. And if there was a problem, I didn't see those problems. I just saw the lighter side of administration and said, I want to be a college professor. So pretty early on, I had made the decision that I wanted to be a college professor. I didn't know what my area of focus was going to be for a while. And then my parents grew up in Chicago, pretty poor, and we lived in Michigan, like I just said, but we would go visit family. And it took me probably till I was in high school to figure out that education and access to healthy options was the difference between why all of my aunts and uncles, and I had a lot of them, seemed really unhealthy and much older than my parents, even though my dad was the oldest of his siblings. And it occurred to me that healthy living and education is what helps you age more slowly. And so I decided that I was going to be a physical education teacher. And so I went to Howard to be a physical education teacher. And when I did my student teaching, I realized I can't do this. I don't like this, and I have to do
That was
something else.
that was the same for me, by the way. I got a student teaching. It was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
Right. And so I always tell students, that's why you have to do your experiential learning. That's why you have to do your internships, not just to prepare you for the next stage in your career, but it might be to prepare you for what's not going to be your next stage, because you might hate it. And it's okay, because now you've learned you hate this. So my advisor at the time was the president of the United States Olympic Committee, just randomly. And I know, and she was a Black woman, so she was the first Black president of USOC, and she had a lot of connections, as you can imagine.
After recording the podcast, Dr. Keith let us know that Dr. Doris Corbett, her mentor at Howard University, was actually the president of both the American Alliance of Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, as well as the International Council for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, Sport, and Dance. She was also a member of the International Olympic Committee, but not the president of the USOC.
So she got me an opportunity to have an assistantship at the University of Rhode Island, and that's how I ended up there. Um, and I did cardiac rehab, and I found it incredibly boring, like looking at telemetry all day long. And I really loved the participants, but I was like, boy, there's just nothing here. And then but at that point, a lot of the faculty were members of ACSM, and so I went to a New England ACSM meeting with a bunch of students and our faculty advisor, and I heard Larry Armstrong give a talk, and I was so inspired by him that, like students do, I mustered up the courage to go talk to him after his talk. And anybody who knows Larry knows he's a runner and he moves really fast, and that has not changed. And he goes like, I have to go, so you can walk and talk with me. And I got him to let me come visit him at UConn. And we and he offered me an assistantship because he and Carl Marish were applying for this Department of Defense grant it was between the time of Operation Desert Storm and Desert Shield. And the DoD said you need to have some women in that lab, and they didn't have any. And where I will say that Larry is a real huge proponent of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it was just coincidental. There were just no women there. And so he recruited me pretty hard to come. And, and so I did. And it's a human performance lab that looks at environmental physiology. But my job was to recruit these college students to train them, not me, but the team was to train them to become soldiers, to become heat acclimatized, to become physically fit when they really weren't. And what I saw was what I knew in high school, that look at what education and healthy choices does for you. And I saw these women who were kind of insecure, maybe not very confident, maybe not great students, become these soldiers, but they transformed into these like amazing people too. And I was like, look at what exercise did for these women. And from that point forward, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to work with people who are not healthy, who are not maybe doing well with their life because of comorbidities or because of unhealthy aging. And I want them to see how transformation can occur when they make healthy choices and when they're physically active. So that's what did it for me.
Well, one of the quotes that is attributed to you is that I saw what physical activity could do to make people healthier in so many ways. I knew I no longer wanted to be a bench scientist, but instead a physical activity researcher. That really talks about your transformation from that bench scientist into working with communities, which is what you do now primarily.
Right. And that's the story behind that quote, but that's exactly what happened. And I think for junior faculty and for students who think, well, I'm in this PhD program and I have to do this thing. You have to, well, I would recommend, you don't have to do anything, but I would recommend you do what makes you feel passionate. Larry and I remain good friends. He isn't unhappy that I'm not a bench scientist. He isn't unhappy that I didn't follow in his scientific footsteps. I leave his legacy in other ways. And for anybody to say, oh, NiCole failed you, he would beg to differ. I haven't failed him at all. He trained me to be a good scientist, to be a good researcher, to ask critical questions and to think critically. And it's completely fine. When you introduced me, I was thinking, I bet people wonder why I got this PhD from UConn and then went back and got a master's degree, because I wasn't trained in clinical research and that's what I wanted to do. So I was an assistant professor and I went back and got another degree because I knew I didn't know how to do what I wanted to do.
And that's, you bring up an interesting point there, and that is that so many of us that train doctoral students and train postdocs, we really can't pigeonhole them into what we want them to be. It's about their path and their journey. And I think that's part of what this podcast is about, is helping potential students actually in this field understand that there are just a multitude of pathways that they can follow to make contributions to health and wellness out there.
Right. And so
it's not often it's not often I say something and people go, right.
No, I agree. I don't have anything to add because I completely agree. But it occurs to me that I answered like the first part of your question, and I didn't. You asked me how I became president, and that you have to have a PhD basically or an MD to become ACSM president. And I just talked to you about how I got to this point in my career in terms of research. But the presidency, it's really kind of a short answer. And that is, people think that it's like this career capstone honor to become president of ACSM. And I'm nowhere close to retiring. I couldn't afford it even if I wanted to, and I don't. I've got a lot of work to do. And, I'm 51 years old. So I've got a lot to do in my life. But I worked really hard for ACSM, and it's one of those things that if you're a volunteer, and Tim, you know better than anybody, if you do well working on something, you're tapped to work on something else. And it's true in academia, it's true in professional organizations, and I kept getting tapped to work on projects. And I worked really hard on the projects because I was passionate about ACSM becoming, the best organization that it could be. And really, I became a fellow, I think it was in 2012, and um, I was asked to run for the Board of Trustees. And I remember that I said, I just became a fellow. Like I hadn't even gone to the new fellows reception yet. and I said to Larry Durstein, and we happened to again be in Indianapolis for the annual meeting. And I said to Larry Durstein, I don't think I'm ready to run for the Board of Trustees. And he said to me, the nominating committee wouldn't have nominated you if they didn't think you were ready. And so another lesson for people is if somebody says you're ready to do something, trust them. And so I ran and I won. And then, a few years later, it's a 3-year term. I was off, and I think a year or two went by, and they asked me to run for vice president. And I saw who I was running against, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to win, but okay. I had already said yes. So you don't get to know who you're running against until you say whether you're going to run or not. But I won, and I was really surprised because there were some real stars who were running for vice president that year. Then it was time for me to run for president. Most of the time when you're vice president, you're immediately asked to run for president. And I ran against Walt Thompson, and he and I had become really close friends over the years because we did so much work together. And I lost. And I didn't stop working hard. At the time that I lost, I was an associate professor. I knew it's time for me to go up for full, so I put in my dossier. I got promoted to Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs. I accepted that promotion, and I kept working really hard for ACSM. Being in Indianapolis, I get asked to do a lot for the organization, and every time I could do it, I said yes. And so Walt observed this. A lot of times people lose and they kind of disappear. And I didn't. I kept working hard. I still love the organization. But I liken it to if you're married and you're very close to your in-laws and for me, my husband would say, I don't love you anymore and I want a divorce. And you still love your in-laws. And so if your in-laws ask you to do something for them, you're not going to say no because you still love them. And so it was kind of like that. And Walt led the way to nominate me again. And I said yes. And at the time, I was devastated when I lost. And I talked to my husband. He's like, do you really want to put yourself through that again? And I said, I'm always screaming and stomping my feet about how we have to be a more diverse organization. And when I'm asked to run for a leadership position and I say no, I just don't think that that's appropriate. And so I have to say yes. And so I ran again and I won. And so then that's lesson number 3, that if you really believe in something and someone asks you to help make a change, you have to be courageous enough to say yes, even though it might hurt you in the long run. But it worked out.
It did work out, and it worked out for our benefit as well. So thank you for running again. We are closing up on our time here, and as our regular watchers and listeners know, we always ask our guests if they have a take-home message. If there's one thing that you want the audience to remember from this podcast, NiCole, what would that be?
I think that it would be to remember to work hard towards things that you believe in and not to be afraid, and not to be afraid of how it's going to work out for you, or when you see something wrong, how to address it and to make change. So there's always work to be done in every organization. And if you see something that's wrong, it's really important to think about how you can make it better and then to work towards that goal.
Thank you. That's a great take-home message. And thank you for taking your time today to be with us and sharing your story with us. And I apologize. Well, I thank you for your grace in the face of some of my awkward questions. So sometimes it's just, yeah. Anyway, like I said, thank you for your grace in the face of my awkward questions sometimes. And I want to thank all of you that have taken the time to join us today and be with us on this. We are always concerned about your health and your safety, so we hope that you are still exercising in the midst of the pandemic, but we hope that you're staying safe at the same time. We always sign off by saying stay active and healthy, and certainly we want you to stay active, but be safe and be healthy. And so until the next time, we're from the Huff Hines Institute, and we hope you have a great week.